from the beginning until the end. And if you have questions or opinion, feel free to drop your question and opinion in the chat box. Or if you want to wait until the end of the presentation, you can use the expression button to raise your hand, and then we will let you to ask the speaker directly. So without further ado, I hand this session to Pak Paulus Sarwoto.
All right, sure. Thank you very much, Christine. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the opportunity to GLTC and Sastra English, the English Department of Sanata Dharma, for giving me the opportunity to present a talk on psychoanalytic criticism. Right. So let me share you this PowerPoint. All right. The topic of today's talk is psychoanalytic criticism. And first of all, I would like to frame the talk today within the bigger framework of the dynamic of literary criticism. Right? So since structuralism onwards, meaning after new criticism, after practical criticism, or sometimes they are called under the same umbrella of literary humanism, right? After that, then we witness the appearance of structuralism in literary criticism, and it marks the beginning of literary criticism's reconnection with critical theory. It means that before structuralism, literary studies tried to separate itself from history, from philosophy, from linguistics, in order to be identified as a separate academic subject worthy of its own study. Yeah. But turns out that literary study cannot stand by itself, and the marks of the turn is seen from the way the literary scholars try to relate literary studies with structuralism, post-structuralism, and other ensuing theories. So basically speaking, critical theory can be seen as theory that has moved beyond its original discipline. Yeah. Critical theory includes structuralism, post-structuralism, deconstruction, postmodernism, Marxism, feminism, and psychoanalysis. Those all isms are called critical theory because they have departed from their original discipline, right? Like structuralism, originally it's from linguistics, but then it has moved to the study of anthropology, sociology, as well as literary studies. The same thing also happens to post-structuralism, deconstruction, which originally was actually a philosophical studies, but then it's also adopted by literary scholars to analyze literary work. Also postmodernism, Marxism, feminism, and psychoanalysis, and that is the topic that we are going to discuss today, psychoanalytic criticism. So literary criticism making use of psychoanalytic concepts. Therefore, it's important for us, first of all, to understand the basic of psychoanalysis. What is psychoanalysis? From the simple definition of the dictionary, we can easily find that psychoanalysis is understood as a form of therapy which aims to cure mental disorders by investigating the interactions of conscious and unconscious elements in the mind, right? And two keywords that are often used in this context are, of course, transference and repetition. Yeah, we will discuss about these two concepts later. But originally, psychoanalysis is not, again, literary studies, but it is in the realm of psychoanalysis, in the realm of psychiatry, right? Because it is actually a form of therapy, right? To cure mental disorders, as it's mentioned also, as you can see also from the screen. How it is conducted by investigating the interaction between the conscious and the unconscious. Because of this connection actually between the conscious and unconscious, then we are different from animal, right? Somehow human race, as you know, we are called as neurotic animal who can suffer neurosis. That's human, yeah, because animal is believed not to be able to suffer from neurosis or even psychosis. Yeah. So psychosis is, of course, the heavier kind, the more serious kind of mental disorder. And what is the root of this stuff? The problem that we have psychoanalytically, it's all rooted in the so-called repression, right? Um, Repression is understood as the forgetting or ignoring of unresolved conflicts, unadmitted desires, or traumatic past events, so that they are forced out of conscious awareness and into the realm of the unconscious. So experiences that are too painful for us to remember, pengalaman-pengalaman traumatis begitu, yang terlalu menyakitkan untuk diingat karena bisa bikin ambiar, that those things that are repressed. Yeah. And then it causes, according to Sigmund Freud, neurosis, right? In many different forms. It can be obsessional. For example, in someone's obsession to touch lampposts all the time, you know, terobsesi untuk memegang barang tertentu setiap ketemu. Or hysterical, right? The example of hysterical is, for instance, when someone is developing paralyzed arm for no medical reason, tangannya tiba-tiba lumpuh, tetapi tanpa ada penjelasan medis yang bisa menjelaskan itu, right? Or phobic, yeah, such as being unreasonably afraid of open spaces or certain animals. Yeah, there is a story about a phobic person going to a doctor. This is an anecdote actually, because he is very afraid of chickens. Jadi setiap melihat ayam itu dia ketakutan luar biasa. And then this person went to a psychiatrist to have a therapy, right? And then he was asked by this psychiatrist, why are you so afraid of chickens out there when actually they are not dangerous at all? And then it turns out that this person is so scared of chickens because he thinks that he is corn. Dia merasa dirinya itu jagung, sehingga setiap ketemu ayam itu merasa terancam karena dirinya jagung gitu, dan takut dipatuk begitu. Now, this is called phobia. It's unreasonable, but it happens, right? And then after a couple of sessions in the therapy, finally he is declared healed, sembuh gitu, right? And then before he was released, then there was a final session with the psychiatrist, and then the psychiatrist told him, okay, now you are completely healed, you can return to your society, and then just to make sure you are not afraid of chickens anymore, aren't you? And then he said, no, I'm completely healed, I think, and I'm not afraid anymore of any chickens, right? But the problem is, he said, the problem is, I know that I'm not corn anymore, but the problem is whether those chickens also know that I'm not corn anymore. That's just a joke, see, indicating that he is actually not completely healed. All right. Okay. And let's move on to the next. What happened actually in our psyche? What happened in our psyche? It's called the psychic process, right? Um, the key term that usually appears in this discussion is what we call defense mechanism, right? So it is the strategy on how to cope or how to deal with repressed materials. Yeah. Freud argues that whatever is repressed in the unconscious actually eventually will find a way to the conscious. Yeah. Freud says there is always a return of the repressed, right? So meaning that whatever we are repressing, somehow, someday, they will resurface. And then when we are not in control of it, when we cannot embrace and recognize it, then they might turn destructive. Now, several defense mechanisms that keeps us healthy as neurotic animals is, for example, projection. Projection is when aspects of ourselves, especially negative one, are recognized as part of ourselves, are not recognized as part of ourselves, but are perceived in or attributed to another. So our own desires, antagonisms, for instance, may be disowned in this way. Yeah. So the example of this is when someone is not actually welcomed by his friends in the boarding house, right? Because he or she is unable to adjust himself or herself in the boarding house. So instead of saying that I'm unable to adjust myself to the boarding house, through projection, that particular person will say instead that the persons in the boarding house reject me. That's a projection, right? So his inability is projected into someone else's rejection. The second aspect is sublimation, right? Sublimation is even believed by Terry Eagleton, one of prominent American Marxist theorists, as a process by which human civilization has been thriving, right? So human civilization has been able to thrive so well, right? We reach such modern technology and civilization and all. It's because of this sublimation. What is sublimation? Sublimation is understood as the way how the repressed material is promoted into something greater, yeah, or disguised as something noble. For instance, sexual urges, right? Sexual drives may be given sublimated expression in the form of intense religious experience or longings. Yeah. So some people suspect that someone who is overly religious might actually is repressing sexual drives, sexual desire, right? That's sublimation, and also all other sublimation. For example, desire. Well, Freudian theories very phallocentric as well as sexual, and therefore many of the concepts, for example, how people trying to repress the sexual drives might manifest the drive into sublimation, into something, for example, if he is an architect, into building a very tall church or very tall building. Yeah. So that's sublimation, when what we are repressed, the desire that is not accepted by society, is transferred into something that is noble. Yeah. The other is screen memory. Screen memory, or Freud defines it as the process in which trivial or inconsequential memory is obliterated, yeah, so that a more significant one does not appear or is not remembered by that particular person. Yeah. The example is Freudian slips, slips of the tongue, slips of the pen ketika salah ucap, ketika salah tulis, ya, or misreadings, ya, or what Freud call parapraxis. Ya. Parapraxis is represented, for example, in bungled action. Bungled action itu misalnya mau makan permen itu, tapi yang dimakan bungkusnya, yang dibuang permennya. That's Freudian slip juga. Atau ketika menyalakan mercon sambil merokok, yang dilempar rokoknya, yang dihisap merconnya. That's also Freudian slips. Yeah. What happened there is that actually there is a screen memory happening, yeah, taking place when those things happen, right? And then the last is dream work. I will go back to this in a more detail later about dream work. All right. Next, about sexuality. This is another basic concept of Freudian theory. So Freud argues that sexuality does not begin at puberty, but it begins from childhood actually. Yeah. Beginning with oral stage, anal stage, and then finally phallic stage. Yeah. So in the oral stage, for instance, the baby's mouth becomes not only an organ of its physical survival for eating, drinking, and so on, but according to Freud, it is also what he calls an erotogenic zone, yeah, which the child might reactivate a few years later by, for example, sucking its thumb, and a few years later then by kissing, for example, right? And then anal stage, phallic stage, when the center of sexuality is on the phallus. Yeah. Freud identifies this as phallic stage, not genital stage, because for Freud, basically it's about phallus. Yeah. So he's not interested in female sexuality, or even he considers female sexuality secondary, yeah, to the male sexuality. And then related to that stage in sexuality is one important point in our life that, according to Sigmund Freud, we have to face. And us at our stage at the moment already have passed that stage safely. Yeah. So Oedipus complex is derived or probably inspired by Sigmund Freud's reading of Sophocles' Oedipus Rex, yeah, a drama written by Sophocles around 400 something before Christ. And from that dramatic story, Oedipus theorizes this complex, this psychological complex. Oedipus complex is understood by Freud as the male infant consists the desire to eliminate the father and become the sexual partner of the mother. That's Oedipus complex, yeah, right? But then usually most people are able to go through that process safely, and therefore they still have healthy personality and everything. Yeah, why? Because what persuades the child to abandon this incestuous desire for the mother is actually the father's threat of castration, for being castrated. Therefore, then the boy later on takes some distance from the mother, associates himself with the father, with the hope that in the future he will be able to replace the position of the father when the time comes, and to have the partner of his own. Yeah. And then related to that sexuality discussion is the last item there, that is libido, understood as sexual drive, and it is part of larger drive, which is eros, sometimes also translated as life drive, against thanatos, meaning death drive. Yeah. There is an interesting theory, not by Freud, but by literary scholars, arguing that actually eros and thanatos are just two faces of the same coin. Mereka itu, dua hal ini adalah sebenarnya dua sisi dari mata uang yang sama. So for example, our desire for food, right, is actually part of eros, but at the same time, it is actually part of thanatos, right? Why? Because the desire for food, right, our desire to eat, to have something to eat, is motivated actually to obliterate the desire. Yeah. So the motivation to eat is driven by the desire to obliterate the desire itself, which actually will never be accomplished until you die, until we die. Therefore, actually the life drive implicated in it is actually also the death drive. That's why it's called as, those two things are called as the same faces of the same coin. Now, let's talk then the connection between psychoanalysis and literary criticism. We might want to take a look at it through different lenses, yeah? Depending on which aspect that you want to focus on your literary analysis. Yeah? You can focus on the author, you can focus on the contents, you can focus on the form, and you can also focus on the reader, right? I will go through those four processes step by step, from the author, contents, forms, but I have no time for presenting the last one, the reader, but we can talk a little bit about that later. All right. So psychoanalyzing the author can be seen as the oldest, tradition in psychoanalytic criticism, right? Psychoanalyze penulisnya. Ya. From the study done by Susanna Villman, for example, she presented these two findings. First is a study by Joseph Woodcratch, and the second is Marie Bonaparte. Right? Joseph Woodcratch, an American critic, focuses on Edgar Allan Poe. Right? Edgar Allan Poe is, of course, a poet who is famous for writing horror story, right? Gothic story, scary story. And then, based on the observation and analysis of the short stories, Crutch concludes that the text, the short stories written by Edgar Allan Poe, is actually an accurate transcription of severe neurosis, right? Jadi cerita-cerita pendek Edgar Allan Poe, seperti misalnya Oval Portrait, kemudian apalagi Purloin Letter, ya, dan yang lain lagi, itu adalah bentuk sebenarnya contoh dari transkripsi keadaan psikis Edgar Allan Poe yang mengalami tidak hanya neurosis, tapi dikatakan oleh Crutch sebagai severe neurosis, keadaan neurosis yang parah. And according to Crutch, Poe suffered from pathological condition of sexual impotentia. Why? Because of a fixation on his mother, mother fixation. This is another psychological disposition that I will return later, mother fixation. And then he also concludes that therefore his literary fame is actually in the sublimation of his anger toward his father, who failed him, according to Crutch. And his fictional work of horror and destruction is actually his refuge for his sexual impotence. Yeah. That is the kind of analysis that can be seen as exemplifying psychoanalysis of the author. And then the second is by Marie Bonaparte. Right? Marie Bonaparte's treatment of the text is a little bit more sympathetic with Edgar Allan Poe. She argues that actually what has been experienced by Poe was not something that is singular. That's actually the experience that we all also experience. Yeah? But we were able to repress it in our childhood, whereas Edgar Allan Poe failed to repress that. Yeah. What Edgar Allan Poe failed to repress are drives and instincts from the id. So you remember the triadic id, ego, and superego, right? So this instinct drives, this animal drives, still persist in Edgar Allan Poe's psyche, and therefore as a channel for this repression is this manifestation of horrific short stories that he wrote, right? And Marie Bonaparte also finally conclude that Poe is actually fundamentally a necrophilia, someone who has this, obsession with dead body, right? Now, what is wrong with this kind of criticism? Although this criticism is very interesting, especially with the surprising conclusion and analysis on certain writer, the problem with it, with this kind of criticism, is that it does not provide a sound framework, convincing framework for theorizing the relation between psychoanalysis and aesthetics. Their criticism, or this kind of criticism, when you try to psychoanalyze the author based on the works that they have written, then they will read like a clinical studies of psychopathic personality rather than literary criticism proper. So it looks like a psychopathic personality, which is analysis, which is not literary scholars. Right. So those are the problems with this kind of criticism, psychoanalyzing the author. Therefore, according to the critics, psychoanalytic theory, psychoanalyzing the author, has been abandoned and seen as outdated, seen as old-fashioned. So if you want to use now, if you want to psychoanalyze the content of literary works, then there are things that actually you can look at, right? So what to look? First, distinction between conscious and unconscious, right? So you try to differentiate in the text between the conscious and the unconscious, right? The dynamic of the characters, for instance. What happens in the level of consciousness and what is actually happening in the level of the unconscious, right? Second, you might want to uncover the character's motive, otherwise inexplicable, by means of close reading method, right? I need to underline this because if that particular text has already provided the answer, clear answer of what causes the character to experience certain neurosis, right? Then actually there is no need for psychoanalytic theory to explain, right? Because then it can be elaborated by means of close reading method, right? Focusing on the text itself, then you can solve it. So then, from my observation, psychoanalytic theory can be really helpful and can be really interesting approach to apply whenever a text cannot be explained by means of close reading method alone, right? We will see the example later on. The third possibility is seeing in literary work an embodiment of classic psychoanalytic conditions, right? Usually then we relate it with certain psychoanalytic concepts such as Oedipus complex, matter fixation, or if we use Lacanian concept, then mirror stage, symbolic order, and things like that, right? So these three possibilities actually sometimes they are not separated but overlap. Okay, let's take a look at this first example. Right, you might be familiar, or you must have heard at least the title of this play, Hamlet, written by William Shakespeare in 1600. Yeah, let's take a look at the summary. Yeah. In the play, Hamlet's father is murdered by his own brother, Hamlet's uncle, who then marries Hamlet's mother. The ghost of Hamlet's father appears to Hamlet and tells him to avenge the murder by killing his uncle. His uncle's name is Claudius, right? There is no obvious difficulty about doing this, but Hamlet spends most of the play delaying and making excuses. Why? Well, it's difficult because actually he is not particularly squeamish as he kills other people in the course of the play. So why is this hesitation? Mengapa dia selalu ragu-ragu untuk mengeksekusi kecurigaannya itu, right? Padahal juga itu already reveals and confirms suspicion. Bahkan Gus ayahnya itu yang memperlihatkan tadinya ke teman-teman Hamlet, kemudian ke Hamlet sendiri, menunjuk secara meyakinkan bahwa Claudius itu pembunuh saya dan tolong balaskan dendam saya ini, right? But then, why is this hesitation? Why is the delay, right? Dan itu lalu yang menjadikan quote dari Hamlet juga sangat terkenal, right? To be or not to be, that is the question, right? Critics have long debated the question without coming to any general accepted conclusions. Right? Now, it means what? It means that close reading alone is unable to answer Hamlet's hesitation. Teks tidak provide evidence kenapa Hamlet harus ragu-ragu, kenapa dia harus hesitant. Now, that's why then the importance of psychoanalytic approach or theory to be applied there, right? So psychoanalytic criticism offers a neat and simple solution, right? Hamlet cannot avenge this crime because actually he is guilty of wanting to commit the same crime himself. He is suffering from Oedipus complex actually. Repressed sexual desire for his own mother and a consequent wish to do away with his father. Thus, the uncle, Claudius, has merely done what Hamlet himself secretly wished to do, right? Hence the difficulty for him being the avenger. Karena membalaskan dendam, membunuh Claudius, itu seperti membunuh dia sendiri lalu. Right? Now, this is one of the example of how you might want to apply psychoanalytic theory in a literary text. But of course, it has been done by Freud himself, and therefore you need to find a niche, a different area that other critics have not occupied. This is the second example. I took this from Peter Berry's book, right? So you can also later on check it by yourself. The title of the play being analyzed here is The Homecoming, right? The critics analyzing it is Rowe, M.W. Rowe. Homecoming, written by Harold Pinter. It centers on the East End of London, right? All-male household, sebuah keluarga di London, pikiran, ya. Semuanya cowok, right? Dipimpin oleh ayahnya yang masih hidup, ibunya sudah meninggal. Ayahnya ini yang autokratik, right? The mother has been dead for some years, but her memory is worshipped by the widower and her sons. There is a third son who is emigrated to America. Anak ketiga itu pergi ke Amerika, bekerja sebagai dosen di sana, college professor. He comes back on a visit to his family, bringing his wife. Makanya judulnya Homecoming, ya. And then during the visit, the sons and the father have the idea of setting their brother's wife up as a prostitute in a Soho flat and living off that proceeds, right? Now, their brothers agrees to this, and the wife accepts it calmly when it is put to her, having first of all extracted the best possible financial terms and made it clear that she will be in many ways the boss of this new household. Her husband goes back to America without her, to their 3 children, all boys. These events seem so bizarre that the play is often performed as a kind of surreal farce. Now, Rose's take on this absurd play is interesting, right? So according to Rowe, the character, the college professor that lets his wife to be employed as a prostitute is actually suffering this mother fixation complex, right? Mother fixation complex. So mother fixation takes place whenever someone is going through a certain incident in his childhood, namely the death of the mother, and therefore the Oedipal stage has not yet been completed, right? What happened there is then such people attracted only to women who resemble the mother, right? So after the death of the mother during childhood, then when he grows up, he will try to find a woman that looks like his mother, that resembles the mother. But, for example, after he gets a wife or a girlfriend, because of the shadow of the incest taboo then makes the expression of sexual feelings towards them difficult or impossible. How can you marry your own mother, right? And therefore, there are 2 possibilities out of this problem. First, you become impotent. So secondly, then to seek sexual relationship with women who do not resemble the mother and whom they therefore despise, right? So in order to generate sexual excitement, such men have to degrade the love objects to such way into a prostitute, for example, so that he can have sex with her, right? It's called arrested Oedipal stage, ya. The exaggerated reference for the mother. Jadi, harusnya Oedipal stage itu selesai ketika kecil, tapi proses itu belum tuntas, ibunya sudah meninggal, sehingga arrested tahap itu terbawa sampai besar. Ketika mencoba mencari istri akan mencari yang mirip dengan ibunya, entah fisiknya, entah sifatnya. Tapi ketika mau having sex tidak bisa, dia menjadi impotent. Sehingga figur ibu ini harus di-degrade sedemikian rendah menjadi figur prostitute, right? Dan that explains why in the play he readily agrees with the suggestion to employ his wife as a prostitute. Why? Karena memang selama ini dia begitulah memandang istrinya sebenarnya sebagai seorang prostitute. Ya. Jadi yang para mahasiswi hati-hati kalau sudah punya pacar, coba main ke rumahnya, gitu. Lihat foto ibunya mirip kamu atau enggak. Kalau mirip, wah, bahaya. Right? Now, the third is psychoanalyzing the form, right? Apa yang dimaksud dengan form? Tadi kan content, ya. Ini form. Form refers to the materiality of the artifact itself. Its specific formal constitution. Itu definisinya dari Eagleton. Ya. Jadi its specific formal constitution, right? Nanti kita lihat aplikasinya, mungkin akan semakin menjadi jelas. Jadi tidak hanya pada karakter saja, tetapi specific formal constitution of the narrative itself, right? Of course, characters are included, but not in order to find the content what is beneath, in the unconscious of the character, but how the form itself actually enact certain psychoanalytic concept, right? Okay, so let's see this one. We are going to focus on a text written again by Edgar Allan Poe, and the title is The Purloined Letter, the Stolen Letter, surat yang dicuri. Right? Itu yang akan kita. This one is done by Lacan actually, but then also developed by Susanna Feldman in her books. What is the story about? The story is about C. Auguste Dupin, French name, tulisannya Dupin, tapi bacanya Dupin. And in the story, he is discussing his closed cases with the narrator. There's narrator, there is the Dupin, right? When they are interrupted by the arrival of the Paris prefect, Pak Kapolda begitu, G namanya. Ya. Unsurprisingly, the prefect has a case for Dupin. Dia punya kasus untuk dipecahkan oleh Dupin. As the title of the story suggests, a letter has been stolen. Jadi ceritanya itu surat ratu itu dicuri, right? Belong to the queen. Surat itu dicuri di depan ratu dan di depan king. Ada minister D di situ pencurinya, right? The queen is looking at the letter anxiously, dia sangat khawatir gitu. Kalau surat itu dilihat oleh king, right? Jadi pasti surat itu something dong, ya kan? Minister notices this, lalu mencuri surat itu digunakan untuk blackmail the queen. The prefect, Kapoldanya ini tells Dupin that he believes that the letter's content are still a secret. Jadi tidak ada orang tahu isinya, masih pasti dirahasiakan karena kalau itu sudah nggak rahasia lagi, surat itu kehilangan kekuatan untuk blackmail, ya kan? Jadi prefeknya yakin bahwa isinya masih aman, ya, dan masih pasti dimiliki oleh Minister D, pasti disimpan di rumahnya dan digunakan selama ini untuk exploit the queen financially mungkin, tetapi tidak untuk destroy the queen reputation karena isinya masih disimpan, right? Nah, and then unfortunately a thorough search of Minister D's hotel has turned up nothing. Jadi prefeknya ini Pak Kapoldanya udah nyuruh jajarannya untuk search hotelnya, ini nggak ketemu surat itu, right? Dupin mengingat itu semuanya, right? And then what happened next? The story skips ahead a month. Sebulan kemudian, the prefect is still searching for the letter. He offers Dupin 50,000 francs kalau dia berhasil menemukan surat itu, right? Lalu Dupin langsung memberikan suratnya. Nih, suratnya, mana bayarannya, right? And then Dupang explains to the narrator how he tracked down the letter. He says that the police underestimated Minister D because he was a poet. Right? Dupang visited Minister D in his hotel room. Instead of having hid the letter, Minister D left it out in the open. Suratnya itu ternyata di sini, di orang yang nggak akan menduga bahwa surat sepenting itu ditaruh di tempat yang sangat terlihat oleh semua orang itu. Right? But Dupang is able to identify, right? Jadi ketika dia orchestrate commotion di depan rumahnya si Minister D, yang dia buat sebenarnya, dia diam-diam mengambil surat itu dan mengganti surat itu. Right? Now, that's the story of a stolen letter. Right? Let's try to psychoanalyze this form. Right? Let's return a little bit to the psychoanalysis, right? Psychoanalysis is a process of what's it? A psychoanalyst trying to cure mental disorder, right? The method, right, is by repetition and displacement. Yeah? Repetition and displacement, right? So what is meant by repetition and displacement itu secara mudahnya begini. Jadi misalnya ada pasien yang mengalami neurosis karena masalah dengan orang tuanya, ya, parental problems, parental issues. And then he sees a psychoanalyst. And then the process, one of the processes, of course, is by repeating, right, what has been experienced by the patient in order later on to displace the anger, to release the anger, not to the parents, to the real parents, but to the analyst. This is the process that is called transference, right? Jadi kemarahan terhadap ayahnya melalui proses konsultasi dengan psikiatris, lalu kemarahan itu ditransfer, right, ke sang analisnya. Maka seorang psikoanalis pasti sudah ditrain supaya dia tidak melakukan counter transference, karena kalau tanpa latihan bisa jadi orang yang mencoba-coba melakukan itu justru dia menjadi korban proses dan melakukan counter transference terhadap pasien yang akan sangat berbahaya. Nah, theoretically speaking, once the anger is released, then the patient will return to his former self, become a healthy person. Right? Now, let's see what happens in the text. We can see that there is also a repetition in the text. Right? The first triangle involves the king, queen, and minister. Right? Minister melihat bahwa queen sangat concern dengan surat yang tergeletak di meja. King tidak tahu. Minister mencuri surat itu. Right? That is the first narrative. Second, Dupang, minister, and police. Right? Minister tentu dia tahu di mana surat itu. Posisinya dia seperti queen. Right? Dupang is like the minister. Dia tahu juga posisi surat itu. Dan dia juga mencuri surat itu, right? Replace it with the fake one. The police is unable to do that. Nah, sekarang the analysis then can conclude that actually, from the psychoanalytic perspective, this text, Purloin letter, actually enacts the psychoanalytic process, right? First, by repetition, right? Secondly, by displacement, right? Displacement of what? Displacement of the letter. And the letter actually is the embodiment of the unconscious. Why is that so? Why is the letter can be seen as the embodiment of the unconscious? Because we can see the phenomenon, we can see the symptom, but we never know the content. The letter is the same. What we observe from the letter is the symptom, that it has caused concern, that it has caused anxiety, but we never know what the content actually is, right? Somehow, when finally the letter is displaced, when it is revealed, right, then it loses its power. Then the unconscious drive that can be dangerous if not recognized or embraced or understood finally is disempowered, right? So this is the example of how psychoanalytic theory can be used to psychoanalyze the form of literary works, right? I will, do I still have time? Okay, running out. But I will try to add a couple of other things. First, I will try to relate how psychoanalytic theory can be combined also with other theories, right? First is psychoanalysis and feminism, right? Of course, there is a pros and contras for applying or combining psychoanalysis with feminist theory, right? The cons, one of the critics, Milley, for instance, she condemns Freud as a prime source of the patriarchal attitudes against which feminists must fight. Beberapa feminis, terutama sebelum 169, ya, menuduh Freud itu sebagai biang dari sikap patriarkal yang membuat perilaku tidak adil gitu terhadap perempuan. Misalnya dalam konteks konsep Freud tentang phallocentrism itu kan, what is important is the phallus, is the center. What about the women? Mereka nggak punya, sehingga para perempuan itu mengalami apa yang oleh Freud disebut sebagai suffering from neurosis caused by penis envy. Jadi envious, iri hati karena tidak punya penis. Sehingga perempuan itu kadang uring-uringan, mudah marah, nggak jelas. Itu kata Freud, bukan kata saya. Nah, itu pandangan seperti itu lalu yang ditentang oleh para feminis itu, right? Freud terlalu phallocentric, terlalu male-centric. But since 1974, especially with this publication of Juliet Mitchell's book Psychoanalysis and Feminism, Radical Reassessment of Freudian Psychoanalysis, terjadi sebaliknya. Justru menurut Juliet Mitchell, ya, dan juga Simone de Beauvoir nanti, itu Freud justru menunjukkan bahwa gender itu konstruktif, right? Harus dibedakan antara sex and gender. Seks itu given, bahwa cewek lahir dengan fisiologi tertentu, cowok juga fisiologi yang berbeda, itu given, nggak bisa diganggu-gugat. Tapi persoalan gender, right, itu social construction, dan itu ditunjukkan oleh Freud dalam teorinya. Begitu kata si Juliet Mitchell ini, right? Nah, Simone de Beauvoir even mentions pernyataan yang sangat terkenal sekali. One is not born a woman, rather one becomes a woman. Perempuan itu menjadi perempuan bukan karena dari lahirnya perempuan, tapi karena dibentuk oleh keluarga, oleh masyarakat, oleh pendidikan, ya, oleh universitas. Universitas itu kalau ada kegiatan mahasiswa, itu perempuan itu biasanya jadi apa? Seksi konsumsi, ya, sekretaris. Kalau seksi keamanan, laki-laki. So it indicates that one is born a woman. Bahkan pada tingkat universitas yang harusnya bisa mencerahkan pun itu terreplikasi, right? Therefore, by combining these two approaches, then we understand that gender roles itu malleable and changeable. Bahwa gender roles itu fluid, tidak fix gitu ya, bukan inevitable, bukan unchangeable givens, but constructed, and since it is constructed, therefore it can be negotiated and it can be changed. Right. And then the last possibility of combination of psychoanalysis is psychoanalysis and Marxism. Ini juga sama, ada pro dan kontra, right? Yang kontra misalnya mengatakan Freudian theory substitutes private psychological causes and explanation for social and historical ones, kata mereka. Jadi itu dua pendekatan yang berbeda karena psychoanalysis itu tentang individual drama, sedangkan Marxism itu tentang social drama. Bagaimana bisa dikombinasikan kata yang kontra? Ya. Sementara yang pro mengatakan Freudian theory is a materialist theory of the making of the human subject. Ya. Jadi teori Freud itu sebenarnya adalah teori materialisme tentang bagaimana human subject itu terbentuk. Interaction of bodies that are socially specific. Ya. Ada di situ lalu persoalan politics, ada persoalan ideologi, karena living body is always constrained within certain societal constraints or certain ideological constraints, right? Jadi argumennya paralel ini dengan para feminis tadi, ya, tentang cons dan prosnya. Okay. So one of the psychoanalytic concept that is of interest to the Marxist theories is this concept of dream work that I promised in the beginning to return, right? Dream work. The motive of human society is in the last resort economic one, kata Freud. Seperti katanya Marx, gitu ya. Tapi ternyata tidak, Freud yang mengatakan begitu. Ya, bahwa motif terkuat dari manusia itu sebenarnya adalah economic drive. Ya. Mengapa mengajar overload? Wah, economic drive. Penelitian, economic drive. Gitu. Rekening listrik dimasukkan, wah, economic drive. Right? But the harsh necessity for labor means that human must repress some of the tendencies to pleasure and gratification. Right? Kenyataan bahwa labor itu juga membatasi penghasilan, membatasi dan seterusnya, right? Lalu pleasure principle yang kita miliki itu, keinginan untuk hedonis itu, pasti lalu harus dikendalikan, right? Terjadilah apa yang disebut repression tadi, right? Leading to neurosis and psychosis. Oh ya, sedikit perbedaan neurosis dan psikosis itu. Kalau neurosis itu misalnya orang mengalami histeria tadi, tangannya lumpuh, tangan kirinya lumpuh, padahal tidak ada penjelasan medisnya gitu. Itu histeria, itu neurosis. Kalau psikosis itu terjadi ketika apa yang direpress itu justru mengontrol atau mengendalikan ego, right? Jadi tidak hanya bahwa tangan kiri lumpuh, tapi seorang psikosis akan melihat tangannya itu berubah menjadi belalai gajah misalnya. Karena kesadarannya sudah di-take over oleh unconscious drive-nya. Ya. Nah, the interpretation of dream, according to Freud, and then adopted by Marxist thinkers, ya, is the royal road to the unconscious. Jadi, interpretasi terhadap mimpi itu adalah cara yang paling convenient untuk melihat apa sih yang ada di unconscious atau latent content, right? Slide yang terakhir. I will try to give a brief explanation of what is happening in this process. When we are in our daily life, we tend to repress things, right? Things that are too painful to remember, for example, right? Selalu kita repress di sini. Bentuknya seperti iceberg, gunung es. Jadi conscious kita itu sedikit sekali dibanding dengan apa yang kita repress itu. Yang kita repress ini ngeri sekali, banyak sekali, right? Dan kebanyakan itu tidak dikenali. We don't know what they are. right? Now, the process of repression itu yang oleh Zizek, Slavoj Zizek, disebut primary revision. Jadi material-material yang ada di mana manifest kesadaran itu di-repress ke unconscious. Nah, apa yang terjadi ketika mimpi, right? Freud mengatakan there is always a return of the repressed. Yang di-repress itu pasti, mau tidak mau, suka tidak suka, suatu saat akan muncul kesadaran. Ya, kalau kamu terlambat, dia mengontrol kesadaranmu, lalu orang menjadi psikotik, atau dalam bahasa awam disebut menjadi gila itu. Right? Now, one of the safe valve, right? Jadi loop yang aman untuk meloloskan apa yang ada di bawah sadar ini, kesadaran tanpa merusak, itu adalah lewat mimpi, right? Nah, mimpi itu melalui apa yang disebut oleh Freud condensation and displacement, right? Condensation is when incidents, pictures, people, all of other things are condensed into a single picture. Dream itu kan tentang picture, kan? Seperti kita nonton film. Itu condense menjadi satu, right? And displacement, displacement itu misalnya kemarahan yang amat sangat terhadap ayah, itu kan nggak mungkin diluapkan, apalagi kamu masih tergantung semesteranmu pada ayahmu, gitu kan. Lalu dalam mimpi itu displace supaya safe itu menjadi figur lain, entah apalah. Ya. Misalnya kalau orang Jawa itu kalau mimpi digigit ular itu loh, gitu. Kalau mimpi digigit ular itu artinya apa? Artinya dia akan menemukan jodohnya katanya.